to Undertow Realms podcast dedicated to stories of the weird and the wicked. I'm your host, director, and producer, Fred Greenhalgh. We continue today with part 2 of The Collection. Last time, we met Peter, a veteran of World War I whose estranged father had passed away, leaving him an unexpected inheritance of an estate in the north of England. But perhaps even more intriguing was the matter of a mysterious woman and a strange book he encountered at the law firm managing his father's will. And after asking questions that are, frankly, better not asked at all, a frightened woman has given Peter the book to draw his own conclusions from. But what does it all mean, and why does all of it seem to be drawing him to his father's estate? Well, we will find out today in part 2 of The Collection.
On Tuesday, I returned to the Downing Post, not wanting to think about last night's encounter with Rapp, and so as not to tiptoe around Frances. Even after trying to hide the cigarette, she'd still smelled it on me after I'd come in. She'd made me spend the night on the sofa. I sensed she was still cross with me about our conversation on Saturday evening, too. Despite my desire to ignore Rapp's book, I brought it along. I feared Frances might find it while tidying. Then she'd worry even more. Unedited reports were stacked on my desk as usual. The topmost pages detailed the murder of Miss Inga Rapp, a spinster librarian, in Trafalgar Square. I dropped into my chair. My legs felt like pudding as I read the article. It seemed that Rapp was thrown in front of a passing car. While no one was able to identify the person who pushed her, a witness recalled the figure of a tall, gangling man vanishing into the shadows of an alleyway. The constabulary found nothing on her save for a note, what seemed to be an address. I wondered if it had been mine. I'd been staring at it for minutes before I noticed my office secretary, Rowena, standing in the doorway.
"You've barely touched your coffee. Must be a good one you've got there," she said, wiping a blonde hair from out of her eyes. "I'd be happy to type it up for you when you're finished."
In a panic, I tried to push Rapp's book to my left, but it met with a stack of papers which toppled to the floor. Leaping out of my chair, I quickly began to sort them. "I'm sorry, I didn't get much sleep last night." Rowena knelt down to help me. A wave of her gardenia perfume swept over me, and those big blue eyes filled with concern. Lord in heaven, my editor-in-chief hadn't hired the youngest and prettiest girl in the office just for her quick typing. "It's okay," I said. "I've got it."
"You look as white as a sheet," she continued. "Perhaps you've come down with something."
I quickly stood and dropped the papers on my desk. For moments, I wondered if I was losing my grip on reality, if what I'd read had truly happened. But one more look confirmed it. Rapp was dead, and the book she'd handed to me was still on the floor like an omen of last night's encounter. "I'm fine, really, but I can't have any interruptions today." Rowena nodded. With brows still furrowed, she left me and closed the door behind her. I picked Rapp's book up from the floor, and without sitting, opened the cover as if something might reach out and snap at me. In swirling script, after a few blank pages, I found the words "The Collection" inscribed, followed by authors' names, Professor Kian Dawson and Inga Rapp's in smaller letters below that. At the bottom, in all caps, read, "Majority housed at Caulfield Manor." I turned the next page. A penned sketch of a full-length mirror took up most of the sheet. It looked like a mirror anyone would find at a great house, something a lady might stare into while observing her new gown, or a gentleman admiring a new jacket. It reminded me much of the one my own mother had. The head of the page was titled "The Hall of Viscount's, Mirrors Recovered and Restored from an Archaeological Dig in Ephesus. Threat high. Control your fear." "Control your fear," I whispered, my voice sounding almost too loud in the silence of my office. What did that even mean? The next page showed a similar sketch of a suit of armor, although it was not of a design I'd ever seen. The paladin, Found in the pass of Roncesvalles in the Spanish Pyrenees. Threat high. Silence is necessary. I stared at the words until they seemed to blur together. Silence was necessary. Control my fear. What did that have to do with anything? And why had my father classified these individual things as though they were... Rapp's voice returned to me hesitantly. Dangerous. A knock on my door brought my head up. Rowena pushed in before I could answer. "The chief is waiting for your final edits on the riot story. I tried to tell him you were busy and he looked like he was about to blow his top." Her words faded. "Goodness, what is that? Are you okay, Mr. Dawson? You look positively baffled." Behind her, I noticed several others glancing in my direction. It was as if they, too, could sense the rising stress caused by this book. "I need to leave," I said. This was not the place for this, not the time. I couldn't concentrate on work while these startling revelations about my father's sanity stared me in the face. "But what do I tell—" "I'll have the edits for him first thing in the morning." I shoved the book into my briefcase. "Cover for me, would you? Atta girl," I said, not waiting for a response as I darted around her and out the front door. I didn't have a plan for where I'd go, but nevertheless my feet guided me in a direction other than home. I couldn't go back to the house. No doubt Francis was still upset with me, and I was determined to keep my family separate from all of my father's affairs, as insane as they were. If Rapp's death was connected to this book, I wanted Francis and Emil as far away from danger as possible. My arrival at King's Cross was an unplanned act. It was as if I was watching myself from the outside, a composed and collected version of myself who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. I came out of my haze during the train ride. A man asked to join me in my compartment, and I stared at him as if he'd just sprung into existence. He mumbled and moved on. Glancing down at my ticket confirmed that I was on the train to King's Lynn. I stared out at the countryside, the morning light banking against the hills. This couldn't go on any longer. Today, I'd find this Caulfield Manor and uncover this supposed collection there. Undoubtedly, the police would find a witness who would say that Rapp bumped into me outside my house. Or they'd find I'd gone to see her at the King's Lynn Library and that our meeting had been less than amicable. I'd be forced to turn over the book in order to corroborate my story, and that might have still incriminated me. I looked down at the book once more and felt my stomach turn at the thought of opening it up again. What was written along those pages seemed to be nothing more than absurdity. Dangerous mirrors and suits of armor. Had my father and this equally disturbed woman spent 27 years compiling a list of fantastic objects with the realness of a child's nightmare? Did the actual collection even exist, or was it born of two ill and addled minds? I wasn't sure if I wanted it to be folly and to think my father crazy, or to believe that his and Rapp's deaths had been more than just accidents, and that this collection was actually as dangerous as was portended. A lump grew in my throat. Rapp had made a reference to them when she'd given me the book. What if this mysterious them were the ones who had killed her trying to get the book? What if these people were still after the book and discovered that I now had it? Would they come looking to kill me as well? Would they go after Francis? Would they hurt Emil? I started to wish that I'd never gone to work that morning, that I'd never seen that unedited report about her death. All it had done was open the doors to a commotion of horrible probabilities that jumbled about in my head and wouldn't be silenced. I shook my head and pleaded with myself to think straight. Then again, what if Rapp was batty after all? These people she told me were after her, what if they were a product of hysteria, and the person who purportedly killed her was a jilted ex-lover or a disgruntled colleague? It might even have been an indiscriminate murder. Perhaps she'd stepped out in front of that car herself without looking. I sat, rubbing my knuckles. The little compartment felt hot and cold as I fluctuated between anxiety and then sensible relief. What if I raced all the way back home and found that everything was as it should be? The only way to confirm if this Caulfield Manor was as dangerous as Rapp said was to go and look at the property myself. I needed to be sure. I needed confirmation. When it came time to switch trains at King's Lynn, I spent half an hour trying to convince myself to board the Wolferton train, pacing to and fro while I smoked a cigarette down to the stub. Spying a telephone box, I pushed in, deposited a few coins, and asked the operator to connect me with the pavilion at the Lord's Cricket Ground in St John's Wood. I prayed Aaron was there, as I knew it was rare for him to be home this early in the day. A young man picked up on the other line, and I asked him to put Aaron on the phone if he was available. My hands were shaking. Why was this so hard? Perhaps because I worried that he was at his wit's end with everything. Finally, Aaron came on the line, laughing, and said, "Hello." Aaron, What was I going to say? How was I going to say it? I suddenly couldn't make my mind work. No matter how I put things, he was going to think I was balmy on the crumpet. "Peter, is that you? Can you repeat that? You've cut out a bit." "Sorry, I just..." What if I told him and unwittingly made him a target as well? It was silly, thinking there was a grand conspiracy surrounding my father. But I couldn't help it, and I certainly didn't want anyone I cared about being in danger because of it. "What's wrong? Are you all right?" Aaron asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm getting on a train at Wolferton." "Wolferton? Why in hell's bells are you..." "If I don't call you back tonight, promise me you'll phone the police." "Peter, what are you on about? What's happened?" I hung up. In some demented way, I felt better. If indeed there were people after Rapp, and they managed to find me, I knew police would investigate my disappearance or be suspicious if I turned up dead. Furthermore, if the nameless sect fixed their sights on Aaron, he wouldn't be complicit in any of this. On the other hand, if the estate turned out to be a complete fluke, I could call him back and explain that I'd had too much to drink, or that I was investigating a risky story. I'd come up with something. When I finally boarded the train, I didn't let my mind wander, if only to keep my calm. I'd done the only thing I could to get myself out of a jam if I found myself in one. I spent the ride drinking an old-fashioned and staring at the blurring green scenery. I itched for a cigarette, but realized I'd rolled only 2 that morning and already used 1. I convinced myself to keep the last one in case I needed an emergency smoke later. To distract myself, I ignored the turning of my tummy and read further on into Rapp's book. There were more objects on each page that seemed to have no correlation to one another, but to my father were apparently one-of-a-kind antiques. One page detailed a delivery of taxidermy animals split into 2 separate freights. There seemed to be extra fervour about a black rhino among the animals transported elsewhere. Other pages spoke of a chandelier made entirely from human bones, hundreds of gallons of what appeared to be ordinary water from a lake in the Middle East, strange plants harvested from the darkest heart of Africa, and an old piano. The list went on and on. Each page included a brief description of where it had come from, followed by a threat level that ranged from low to high, and finally a sentence that seemed to make no sense whatsoever. The train took a bend and my insides shifted. We were slowing down. I peered out of the carriage window to the track ahead of us. Wolferton Station was a Tudor-style structure with a clay-shingled roof. I'd never been a fan of the architecture. It always made me feel uneasy. The dark woods striped against the white reminded me of a prison cell. There were no passengers waiting on the platform, which didn't surprise me. Wolferton mostly catered royal trains and to the Sandringham House, home for the monarchy. Most of the people that rode the lines were either guests of Sandringham or workers transporting supplies to and from the house. I stepped down onto the platform, my shoes against the worn bricks the only sound, and proceeded into the station. An oak-panelled room awaited me inside. Leather easy chairs dotted the room, and a great clock chimed the midday hour. Save for the lonely ticket officer, whose wrinkle-deepened face and hooded eyes made me question his efficacy, the station was empty. "When is the next train scheduled to come through?" I asked him.
"Only one more train departing this station today,"
he said, his voice congested and eyes still in a drowsed state. I still couldn't quite master the eccentric and somewhat otherworldly dialect that Norfolk sometimes demonstrated. Taking a deep breath, I calmed myself for the muddled tete-a-tete I was sure awaited me with the ticket officer. "Only one?" He nodded. "What time is the next train departing?"
"Round 4, I reckon."
I straightened and checked the clock. 4 hours to find my father's estate, investigate, and get back to the train. I had no idea where to even look. The ticket officer was beginning to nod off. "One more question." He perked back up. "How do I get to Caulfield?"
"About 2.5 miles on from here. Take a left out front, follow the road till you get to the intersection, then follow the southern road."
"Wait, follow the road? Isn't there a taxi running today?"
"Afraid not."
I sighed. "Looks like I'm walking then." I started toward the door to the street and looked back over my shoulder. "I'll be back for that 4 o'clock train. Don't let it leave without me." He nodded and settled down in his seat to resume his nap. I set off on my path to Caulfield and followed the bending road from civilization into wild, unpredictable greenery. I lost myself in it, remembering the days when I used to explore Rush End in my youth. Everything seemed remarkable then, from the colours of the leaves to the various types of plants. I never grew bored of it, distracted by the thoughts that beyond its ordinary beauty, there was a different world out there from the one I knew, something just out of my reach waiting to be found. My imagination became moribund as I grew up, depleted by my father's own dismissive behaviour and my mother's wilting spirit. It had felt like neglecting a bud that had only just begun to bloom. A dense hedge grew along the roadside for the next mile or so, blocking my view of the forest. The only clarity came from overhead, a pristine blue bowl and clouds that raced by as if trying to escape. The wind had picked up, but was cool and welcome on my perspiring brow. It was another scorcher of a day, and my suit might as well have been made of molten lava. Eventually, the hedges dwindled and the road opened into a 4-way intersection. Lilac blossoms burst from nearly every empty space between the trees, and their sweet scent pulled me from the suspicious quietude. I veered right and continued on.
Hello, Fred, your friendly producer of today's show, popping in to say that, yes, I am as troubled as you are, that Peter is investigating things probably best left uninvestigated in his late father's estate. But I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to something very cool that has been doing wonders for me. It's called Magic Mind. It is a mental performance shot. What the heck does that mean? Well, I'll tell you. So I have the joy of producing audio drama podcasts full-time here as head of audio at Realm. This was always my dream. Now I get to do my dream for work. But you know what? Realm is a startup. Startups are fast-paced, and I've been doing this for a while, almost 3 years at Realm and 20 years overall in the industry. And success is a marathon, not a sprint. And I see a lot of stuff on social media out there in the world, all these trends that sort of glorify grind culture, how great it is to sort of grind yourself to the bone, or celebrating how stressful life can be. And I find that really troubling. On the other hand, finding the resolve to get up each day, get back to whatever your mission or grind looks like, and doing your best can be tough, especially when the world is more distracting than it's ever been. And you need to, do work that's deep work, that's focused work, and access the best parts of your mind. That can be hard. So when Magic Mind reached out to say, well, actually, hey, we have this product that helps with all of that, I was super excited to give it a try. So as I said, Magic Mind is a mental performance shot. It's a little 2-ounce magic elixir full of wonderful things like mushroom nootropics and adaptogens and a full day's dose of vitamin C and D. In each bottle, it is designed to work alongside and not to replace your daily coffee dose, which is good because you'll never pry the coffee out of my hand. But it does make the coffee life experience better. It sort of blocks this dreaded coffee crash that happens a few hours after you indulge in your delicious cuppa, so you kind of get your caffeine trickle throughout the day and not find yourself sleeping at your desk cranking more caffeine thing. And yeah, I gotta say, I'm skeptical by my default mode, but as I said, I was also open-minded, skeptical and open-minded. It's a thing. And Magic Mind is the real deal. I've been using it for a little over a week now, and I guess the way I describe it is it's kind of like a mental rocket booster, and in the best way possible. So unlike, say, where you have like one too many cups of coffee and suddenly you are acting like a squirrel, all jittery, and your hands are twitching and you're not really able to focus on anything and you can barely get a sentence out, Magic Mind instead has this effect where your brain just sort of feels on, like you're firing all cylinders, but you don't have that jittery quality. You're just able to go deep and do your best work. And believe me, achieving flow state can be incredibly elusive, but it's where you get your best work done. And thanks to Magic Mind, I now feel like I've got a little bit of a life hack to help me get there. So that's what I got to say. You have a limited offer that you can use now. This will get you up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchases. Use the code Undertow20 at checkout. You can claim it at magicmind.com/undertow, magicmind.com/undertow, code Undertow20, magicmind.com/undertow, code Undertow20. Try it out. They back it up with a return policy if you don't get the results you want, and you'll be supporting the show. Check out magicmind.com/undertow, code Undertow20. Thank you.
The next half an hour was spent admiring the scenery, listening to the chirps of woodcocks and golden orioles, my feet slowly but surely blistering. My shoes were not made for a pilgrimage. They were meant for sitting behind a desk all day. I began to check my pocket watch obsessively, worrying that it was going to take longer than I'd calculated. I probably should have called it off and waited for the return train home. I could have come another day. It was too late now. I'd already walked an hour out of my way. Just get it over and done with it. The woods thinned, and I looked out across a field of lavender toward an imposing structure. It looked as though it might have once belonged to a well-off family, a disused abbey built of sand-coloured brick and mortar. Someone might have mistaken it for Sandringham if they didn't know their own way, but I felt something in my stomach, a sort of sickness that confirmed the authenticity and the mystery of my father's estate to me. I wasn't wrong. This was Caulfield. I traversed the dirt road that wound through the field, the sweet floral scent of lavender a pleasant distraction in the face of Caulfield's cryptic manor. Verdant sheets of ivy drew up around much of the house's front facade, almost like a mask. I dreaded what I might find hidden behind it. Much like with Wolferton Station, I was aware of an undulating discomfort upon looking at this place, one that deepened the closer I came. The estate was impressive, though neglected. Gnarled hedges blocked my view beyond the front, while a great brick wall with gated arches stood between me and Caulfield. Once I reached the gates, I curled my fingers around the iron bars and stared past them. No curtains were drawn, but the inside of the house appeared black and cold. I doubted my father kept any staff there and couldn't imagine who else could be around. Then I didn't want to think who might be. I leaned on the gate and was surprised when it creaked open. A rusted lock plopped into the stones at my feet. With all the secrecy surrounding the estate, and Rapp's fear of anyone finding out about it, I imagined things would have been better secured. Still, I was glad I didn't have to scale what appeared to have been an insurmountable wall. My shoes sank in the crushed pebbles as I crossed to the front door and struck the knocker. The sound echoed against a vast and empty space on the other side. I took a step back, smoothed my hair, and pulled the creases from my suit. I didn't care how I looked. I had to find something to do with my hands other than wring them obsessively. After a minute, I struck again. No one came to the door. No one was there. Against all of my better judgment, I thumbed down the latch and pushed on the door. It wouldn't budge. I should have imagined it'd be locked. Perhaps there was a key somewhere. Had the key been with Rapp when she was killed? Either the police or the people after the book could have it by now if that was the case. Perhaps there was a spare, one nearby in case the original got lost. I opened the book once more and carefully flipped through the first few pages once again. Beneath the damask, you'll find a skeleton. It was halfway down one of the pages I'd thought was blank in the tiniest handwriting, and didn't seem to correspond to anything else mentioned about the house. But I knew my father's hand. I knew his penchant for speaking in half-truths and riddles. The skeleton was likely a skeleton key. The damask? My gaze settled on an untamed rose bush to the right of the door, full of burgeoning pale pink roses. Several had wilted in the extreme heat, while the ones nestled deepest within the leaves and thorns thrived. Damask roses. They were one of my mother's favourites. Laying the book and my jacket on the front step, I crouched down by the rose bush and pawed at the soil around it. Bugger it all. I hadn't got close enough. I reached my hand further underneath the spiky tendrils and pushed my fingers into the dirt once again. It was an awkward angle, my other hand aching as I balanced on it to keep me from falling flat on my face. Finally, my nails scratched against a smooth, cold box. I wrenched it from the soil bed in one go, thorns snagging against my hand as I brought it into the light. Ah! I dropped the box onto the grass and looked at the damage. Drops of blood rolled down the backside of my hand. I plucked a rag from my coat pocket on the step and dabbed at them, leaving pale red streaks across the white cotton. Retrieving the box from where I'd dropped it, I lifted the lid to see a tiny bundle of red cloth. Wrapped inside was a skeleton key. Discarding the cloth and collecting my things from the step, I slipped the key into the lock and turned it. The click made my breath falter, and against all better judgment, I pushed in the door. The front hall scowled at me as a sliver of light from the entrance revealed its grandeur. The high ceilings depicted rose-copper scenes of war. Frescoes of blackened earth and bleached sky seemed to depict the collision of heaven and hell in the arches above the doors that lined each side of the hall. My feet moved on their own accord. After a few steps, the front door slammed and blackness folded down around me. I jumped, my heart rate fluttering as I listened to the roughness of my own breath. Two lanterns on opposite sides of the hall came to life, and their faint light flickered the room back into existence. I couldn't make myself turn around. Every shadow seemed ominous, every creak I heard a prelude to death. Someone was here, playing games with me. Perhaps Rapp was right to be afraid. Perhaps her killer had found this place before I could. Steady on, I thought to myself, and relaxed my shoulders, which had stiffened without my permission. You need answers. The smallest part of me, the most hated part of me needed to know more. There were doors all around me that would presumably take me to some of the things my father had collected. The part of me that longed for fantasy, that I thought had suffocated in my childhood, needed to be placated. This was the brink of my imagination's reawakening and its ultimate demise. I wasn't ready to walk away yet. I didn't want to be a severe and skeptical father as my own had been to me. It was hard for me to even imagine my father had believed in all of this after how he treated me as a boy. A child's reverie is much like this fungi, he'd once told me as he plucked a mushroom from the grass back home. It is only necessary to a certain set of artistic individuals. Here in this house, it is merely a blemish on a manicured lawn. He flung it toward the wood's edge. "Best you not let it flourish on your mine." I didn't want to be the reason my own son lost his sense of wonder. I pressed on. The decision before me now was simple: which room to enter. There were no marks on the book pages that suggested where each item was. It was a guessing game, and if what the book suggested was true, there could be a threat of death in any one of them. I decided on a whim to enter the door at the end of the hall in hopes that I could eventually see the grounds hidden behind the overgrown hedges. Holding the book close to me, I opened the impeccable mahogany door and entered. I may as well have stepped into another realm. Thick, mustard yellow tapestries hung across the walls like a strange sinew. Ghastly artwork of skeletal figures framed by brambles hung on either side of an ebony dining table. It stretched down the narrow room, a tray at its center where a hunk of something sat alone. The door clicked closed behind me. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Somehow, it had locked from the other side. I willed myself to awaken, to once again see the passing landscape in my train car. This isn't real. I'm not really here. The soft screech of a chair made me open my eyes. Nothing moved, save for the flicker of candlelight at each corner of the room. Then I noticed him. Seated at the head of the table was a knight. I don't understand how I missed him, for he was easily the most terrifying thing before me. Instead of armor, his shoulders were cloaked by bristly shards of bone, some that grew from its decayed figure. Skin had rotted away to reveal ropey muscles along his arms and taut abdominals. A husk of bone encircled his neck, and the remains of a smooth helmet left only one opening at his toothily gaped mouth. Horns jutted from its crown-like antlers. He sat erect, with his arms at his sides, one hand clutching a carved staff with a long spearhead that gleamed under the low light. My heart was in my throat. I waited for this demon to rise, to come for me, to thrust the spear into my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't look as though it could sustain life, not in such a wasted condition. I stepped forward and held my breath. The creature stayed still. The train ride had fatigued me. The book and Rapp's lingering warning kept me on edge. The creature at the end of the table was merely someone's keen idea, my father's apparently, of a practical joke. What had he called it in his book? The Paladin. I recognized the crude sketch I'd seen. Monstrous. I never wanted to sleep again for fear it would prey on me in the night. In that instant, I realized that my father had elicited a weakness from me without being alive to do so, and it made me all the more exasperated. Gradually, I made my way across the room, my eyes never leaving the Paladin. I'm not sure why I'd drawn the comparison of him to a knight. Harkening back to my childhood readings about King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, I knew they were perceived as being symbols of chivalry, honor, and bravery. This creature looked as though it had been raised from the depths of hell. Whatever or whoever he had been when he was alive could not have been regarded so highly, I decided. Midway across the room, I gagged. I could finally see what was on the platter in the center of the table. A hunk of red, raw flesh oozed over the lip of the silver tray and onto the table's surface. Blood drained from my face as I backed away and bumped into the wall. The Paladin swiftly stood from his chair. I froze. Blood roared in my ears, and my pulse thumped in my neck. He didn't move any further, had once again become like stone, rigid and motionless. What was he doing? Why didn't he come at me? I suddenly remembered the page devoted to the Paladin in the book, and the line my father scribbled in that hadn't made any sense to me. Silence is necessary. He had heard me. Now that I was perfectly still and not making sounds, he couldn't. As long as I didn't make any noise, he couldn't move. The paladin stood between me and the door, 10 feet away. If I was going to get out of here, I needed to pass within inches of him and be completely silent. I swallowed the fear that threatened to gallop from me and took a small step away from the wall. The paladin remained where he was. I inched my way along the edge of the room. My eyes flicked back and forth between my own feet and the paladin's. He hadn't turned to follow my movements. I was close enough to see the rough texture of his spikes, the desiccation of his skin, the hollow grooves and crags on his body beneath the horrific armor. Could he sense my nervous breathing? I held it. The door was only a couple of feet from me. Just a little further, I thought, as I lifted my foot and took another step. He still hadn't moved. I was almost there. A little more. A floorboard squeaked. The paladin swung his spear at me. I ducked to the right in time for it to whoosh past my ear. Stumbling, I scrabbled for the door. The rattle of bone and pop of joints moved behind me. I wrenched the door open, a dreadful pressure on my back. He's so close, he's going to... Fingers snagged on my jacket as I tried to escape. I flung it from my shoulders, pulling my arms free as it was torn from me. Barreling through the door, I shouldered it shut. Bang! Something slammed against the other side, and my arm ignited with pain. I backed away, holding it as blood raced down my white shirt sleeve. The spear tip jutted through the solid mahogany. I backed away, waiting for the paladin to open the door and come at me. Nothing. He couldn't hear me. He couldn't move anymore.
And that was The Collection Part 2, serving as another reminder that if people say stay away from creepy houses and investigating things you'd best not investigate, you are probably better off heeding their advice. The Collection was written by Katherine Silva, performed by Cliff Chapman, with editing and sound design by Rory O'Shea, produced by yours truly, Fred Greenhalgh, as a Dagaz media production for Realm. Undertow is a production of Realm, hosted by Fred Greenhalgh, associate produced by Devin Shepherd, executive produced by Fred Greenhalgh and Molly Barton.